what do you make of the disparity between some of these franchises in MLB baseball? How much of that do you blame on other franchises that are not spending enough? How much of that do you blame on, well, this team has endless amount of money? Just kind of the health of MLB baseball. We saw this offseason, aside from last year when they went out and did the 700 for Shohei and the 325 for Yamamoto and Glass now and everything else, they're still on a spending spree. It doesn't seem like it's going to stop. Is good for baseball, bad for baseball? Just your thoughts on what's happening right now between the Dodgers and the rest of Major League Baseball.
Yeah, so owners are cheap. Like, let's be clear about that, right? Most owners are very cheap, and which actually, ironically, right, everybody's kind of complaining about this, created the very rules that allowed Sasaki to go to the Dodgers, and he's gonna be on minimum salary this coming year because of these rules, right? Because when Matsuzaka came, when Darvish came, they were basically at that point, the posting fee was kind of unlimited, and it just went to the highest bidder, and you're basically buying the player from that team, and they were getting into the 50 millions, the 60 millions, and the owner said, "Wait a second here, we
can't afford that,
right?" So they put a $20 million cap, and now it's just a percentage of the contract, right? And so, that happened because the owners were cheap, right? I mean, if this were like a free market, right,
yep,
and you had to bid, I mean, probably somebody pays Chivalote like $100 million for him, and now after, and even with the Dodgers, as much as they've been spending, if they just spent 100 and whatever million on Blake Snell, are they going to turn around and spend another 100 to get Sasaki just to buy him, and right, another maybe 200-300 to sign him to an actual contract? You don't, right? And so, yeah, the Dodgers are really kind of, I feel, taking advantage of the climate, and with a lot of these kind of teams that tend to be ahead of the curve. We always say, right, when everybody's zigging, they zag. And the zigging right now is to not spend money, right? And then these teams have done a phenomenal job, by the way, of convincing their fans that it's against their interest to spend money. Right? Because, these compensation picks that they might lose down the road, it's going to financially hamstring us down the road. And frankly, even with the Dodgers, right? I mean, as much as they, you did mention they were kind of in every year with these guys, it always, to me, kind of felt that they were there to, okay, if your market collapses, we'll be like a really good second option for you, right? So with Freddie Freeman, it's not like they jumped in and were like, okay, let's go over the top here.
No.
It was, the Braves didn't give him what he wanted. He didn't want to go to Miami, and like, hey, we're right here, right? Mookie Betts, basically, the Red Sox were just desperate to get rid of him because they didn't want to sign him to an extension. Dodgers were right there to pick him up, And so now I do think that Otani's kind of changed the entire. They've just given the Dodgers this shot in the arm, in terms financially, right? Because all of this money's deferred. I've talked to some people that have estimated that the Dodgers will make more than $1 billion. Just because, right, 68 of the $70 million salary that he makes every year is deferred, right, until after he retires. And, they don't need that like cash necessarily, like an escrow or anything. They can take that money and invest it, right? And Guggenheim, which owns the Dodgers, that's an investment company. So, they put the thing in, and, I don't know what the returns are, 15, 20%, whatever, every year. Over time, that money's going to multiply. So they're going to make money off that money. And now they've really kind of taken this. They've seen, okay, nobody else is spending. We have all this extra cash sitting around because of Otani, right? And now you're kind of seeing this thing where, right, they can afford to pay these very high signing bonuses because Otani's not getting this money up front. And so, like, hey, we got cash sitting around. Let's just hand it out. And that convinces these players in turn to, like, because they're getting money up front, okay, I'll defer this much of my contract. And this thing is just kind of snowballing. And yeah, there is this big gap now. I don't think it's a bad thing, for baseball, because we have to keep in mind where the sport is as a whole right now, which is not in a good place, right? I do think this past year kind of created this mirage that, like, okay, baseball is doing great because you got a signature player in Otani,
sure,
on a signature franchise like the Dodgers. And you kind of got the Dream World Series, Dodgers, Yankees, and obviously the ratings are way up, compared to the year before between the Reds, the Rangers, and the Diamondbacks. I kind of go back to like the late '90s Yankees teams, right? The last kind of dynasty that we had in baseball. The fact that, right, and with all due respect to guys like Bernie Williams and Paul O'Neill, who are very good players, but those guys actually became household names because you turn on the TV every October and you see them. They become familiar. And I think, when you kind of look at the fact that in a couple of years, baseball's national TV contracts with Fox and ESPN are going to expire, the collapse of the RSN market, which is really kind of the backbone of the sport, given how regional of a sport baseball is, right? Teams are very, and players are very popular in their market, but you don't have guys that are really nationally known. So from that standpoint, if the Dodgers are in the World Series every year, right, everybody's going to be, how many baseball players really have national endorsements right now? Maybe Otani, and that's it, right? And he's not even, and so, the fact that like Mookie Betts and Mookie Betts is in Japan right now,
Sure,
pitching
it's
some
a tea company,
tea company, right?
By
so
the way,
guys,
by the way, Dylan, and I was reading that this morning, but that kind of that trickle effect of Otani that you're talking about, I do feel like I did a video right when Roki signed. It's like, listen, all of this is still Otani, like all of this, the trickle effect. But when I was reading that article this morning, and and Mookie Betts is in Japan, he's promoting a tea company. I'm like, well, that clearly obviously happens with what just happened with the Dodgers and, obviously all these other Japanese players that are there. This man is putting a lot of money in a lot of people's pockets.
Yeah, and I think at some point Mookie was standing next to an Otani cutout, right? Which I think says kind of everything. But like, and then you see it like I think most like in combat sports, frankly, right? Where when you have a superstar, everybody that kind of comes in contact with the guy also becomes a star, right? You have this like halo effect, with Oscar De La Hoya, right? I mean,
sure.
Floyd Mayweather was not
100%.
a well-known fighter until he fought Oscar De La Hoya. Felix Trinidad, he made famous. Bernard Hopkins, he made famous. You could argue, I think, that he took Manny Pacquiao from being, a guy who was popular among boxing fans into like a mainstream attraction. And so I think Otani's kind of having a similar
little bit of
effect.
that with Conor McGregor in the UFC.
Exactly.
There's like certain guys that you're right, just elevated the whole sport.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think, again, having this team in October, and I just saw they just signed Kirby Yates. Like 10 minutes ago, I think I just saw something pop up.
Didn't know that.
I
did not know
so
that.
now they got like the two best relievers that were available.
Wow.
They just got Tanner Scott. So they're really doing, this is going to be fascinating. I mean, we talk about the pressure that's been on Dave Roberts up until now, but it was still kind of like in the thing of like, well, just because you have the best team in baseball, and I think people understand that, right? Just because you have the best team doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win. The Dodgers are trying their hardest to make sure that they can guarantee a World Series. I mean, it's really hard for me to imagine how they lose at this point. I mean, they have 10 major league quality starting pitchers. They're building what could be the best bullpen in baseball. They have the best lineup in baseball. But again, it only takes like two pitchers on the other team to mess up your whole season. But they are trying to kind of create this thing where it's like, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we're there every October. And I think that's great for the sport because there aren't many players, presently that kind of have national recognition. And if the Dodgers are there every October, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, again, these are names that are very popular among baseball fans. You go ask the average NFL fan, they might not know who these guys are. Like, it's shocking just how little people know about baseball right now. And this team will give, I think, baseball a chance to kind of, again, right, have people that are like nationally identifiable, which, again, given all the stuff that's going on with their TV stuff right now, I think is going to be very crucial.
So how do you compete against it? Because I think that the question I would have is, I get the angle of why it could just raise the level of interest in baseball, or, we've kind of had this conversations. Villains is good for business. It is, when you have a team or a player that's a villain, all of a sudden it's like, well, I want to watch that. I get a certain emotion because I'm watching this team or this player or whatever the case is. And that's all you're looking for. You want emotions. That's part of the entertainment side. But I guess my question is, how do you build against this? How do you compete against this? And this is just a broad question from a baseball perspective.
Yeah, I think and we've seen over the years, I think there are multiple ways of doing it, right? I think the Padres, for example, right, they went out, they spent money, and they built a team that was basically designed to beat the Dodgers, right? I do think it hurts them over 162. But you get into a short series against these guys, right? They are built to beat the Dodgers, and they did a couple of years ago, and they probably should have done it this time too, right? I mean, I do think the Dodgers, they were probably the best team in the league by the end of the season. So there's kind of that tactic. You can kind of do, what Arizona did the year before, right, in 2023, which is kind of more the homegrown type thing, right? And kind of try to find the right pieces in free agency to kind of plug them in there. Pitching is what's going to win, right? And I do think now, and that is kind of the one area I think that can kind of still be exploited in a way, in that you don't have the Randy Johnson, Kurt Schilling, the Pete Kershaw guys, Pedros, the guys that are just going to give you like 8 innings. That's not the game anymore, right? And I think, frankly, getting Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates here, to me, is a reflection of that, right? And the Dodgers kind of acknowledging, okay, we could have the best rotation, but, come playoffs, right, all of a sudden the 6-7 innings that you get in the regular season, that becomes 5.
And the way they use their bullpen in the postseason.
Right, yeah. And, Dave Roberts did a fantastic job, I think, kind of pulling all the levers there. But, what's tough about relievers, obviously, year to year, there's more kind of variance in terms of like how they might perform, and so I do think the Dodgers are kind of reacting to that. They're trying to cover up that hole. But you know what? You get, again, in the playoffs, you get 2 starting pitchers going hot, especially like in a 5-game series. You can take them down, right? They're not going to be invincible. And I don't think we're going to see them just kind of, I could be wrong here, but I don't think we're going to see them just win like the next 5 World Series. Like, somebody's going to get them at some point. Maybe they win 3 and 5. But even then, it's going to be 2 years that they didn't win. And I think, maybe that's the kind of balance that you need, right? They don't win. And in LA, it's going to be just an absolute disaster. And you and I, right, you're going to be saying on the air, and I will be writing columns about how could they blow this, bunch of chokers, this and that. And then obviously whatever, market, the team that knocks them out, right, resides in, they're going to be overjoyed by this thing. Hey, we just slayed Goliath. And I think that'll be great for baseball, right? I mean, again, I just say go back, to that Rangers Diamondbacks World Series. We didn't even talk about it, right? I can't imagine, I don't think I spent any column inches on that. I'm sure you mentioned it like in passing, but I really doubt you did an entire segment on that World Series. And so I do think that these things will, right, and because of the nature of baseball, this isn't, basketball or, football, where if you kind of construct a team the right way, you could become unbeatable. Pitching's going to get you. And I do think that at some point, bats go cold. We've seen it before, right? We saw it with, when, the previous 2 seasons before this year, where, they had Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman in the lineup, and they both had historic years, right? Probably the best, like 1-2.
Trey Turner that makes 2 struggled.
Yeah, and, we've seen those teams shut down, and it's going to happen again, right? I mean, the one thing about the Tanner Scott thing that I really like is you're also kind of taking away the big Otani killer, right? He could not hit Tanner Scott in the playoffs, and, not only is Tanner Scott going to help them, he's going to also help them, they also have basically taken away kind of the biggest antidote to the Otani thing that any other team can have, which, again, I think is going to be huge in October.
All right, if you enjoyed this clip and you want more, just subscribe to the channel. Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. is the Sliwa Show. And then after every Lakers game, post-game show right here.